People often say the most painful betrayal comes not from an enemy, but from someone in whom you've placed your complete trust. But what happens when the knife is held by the hand of the very child you spent a lifetime raising and protecting? I invite you to listen to my story, the story of the carpenter's legacy. I never told my son about the multi-billion-dollar contracts. I told a different story. A story about calluses earned from thousands of hours planing wood, about small scars from slips of the chisel, and about the warmth lingering from the hands of Eleanor, my late wife. They were the hands of a carpenter, and for the past 30 years, that is all I wanted them to be. I just wanted them to have a peaceful life. My house is nestled amidst the towering pines of suburban Oregon. I built it myself from the very first beam, alongside Eleanor. Every grain of wood is steeped in her laughter. Every corner holds a memory. My '92 Ford pickup, with a dent in the side from the time I backed into a tree stump, still starts every morning. My life is just like it, old, reliable, and with nothing to boast about. An old dog named Gus, with gray fur and gentle eyes, is my only companion in this silence. That silence, however, was frequently shattered, not by thunder or wind howling through the canopy, but by the roar of the engine of a sleek BMW that my son Mark drove over on the third Sunday of every month. Mark is our only child, but sometimes I look at him and wonder if any part of me or Eleanor still exists in this stranger. He is a real estate broker, always clad in perfectly tailored suits, hair slicked back with gel, and a smile that never reaches his eyes. His eyes always scan my house with unconcealed disappointment. To Mark, my simplicity isn't a philosophy of life. It is a failure, a tangible shame. Accompanying him is always Jessica, his wife. If Mark is the embodiment of ambition, then Jessica is the embodiment of vanity. She lives in a world measured by luxury brands and invitations to elite clubs. She speaks to me in a condescending tone, as if talking to a slow child. She never calls me Dad, it's always Arthur. Arthur, she would say, running a hand lightly over the oak table I spent a month finishing. This table is so rustic. It certainly won't match the French antique collection we're eyeing. The purpose of their visits was never to ask about my health. They were carefully planned attacks. My land, with the wooden house sitting modestly in the center, was their target. Dad, Mark would start, after we sat down with the watery coffee Jessica brought. Do you know how much this land is worth? A corporation wants to build a high-end resort here. They're offering a huge price. I would just remain silent, taking a sip of coffee. Gus would yawn at my feet. You're 68 already, he would continue, his tone shifting to feigned concern. Living here alone is too dangerous. What if you slip in the workshop? Who would know? Jessica would chime in, her voice sweet as sugar but cold as ice. We've found a wonderful place for you. The Golden Meadows Retirement Community. There are nurses 24/7, a book club, even painting classes. You'll be safe, and we will have peace of mind. Peace of mind was the key word. They weren't worried about me. They were worried that their chance to change their lives was being blocked by this stubborn piece of land. I looked at them, at the son I once taught how to hold a hammer, at the woman he chose as a partner. I didn't see love, I only saw numbers dancing in their eyes. This is my home, I replied, my voice steady. Your mother is here. In every grain of wood, in this garden, in the very air we are breathing. Mark sighed, a dramatic sigh of frustration. Mom again. Dad, Mom has been gone for 10 years. You can't live in the past forever. You have to think about the future. The future of your grandchildren. That was their ace in the hole, the grandchildren. Two beautiful kids they rarely let me see, unless they needed a tool for manipulation. I didn't argue. I knew it was useless. This war couldn't be won with words. My silence, my endurance was like oak wood, seemingly quiet on the outside, but inside possessing a durable strength forged over years. I just sat there, observing them, memorizing every word, every look, every gesture. A good carpenter must understand his material before starting work. And right then, I realized that my son and daughter-in-law had become a type of material I never wanted to face. Wood that was rotten from the inside. The visit ended as usual. They left with scowling faces. I stood on the porch, watching their BMW speed away, leaving behind a thin trail of smoke and a heavy silence. I knew they wouldn't give up. The storm was just beginning. And I, like an old oak tree, had to prepare to stand firm against it. In the following weeks, Mark and Jessica's campaign escalated from suggestions to all-out psychological warfare. They no longer came on Sundays. They appeared unexpectedly. At times, they knew I was most vulnerable. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was in the workshop trying to finish a cradle for a neighbor's baby, Mark suddenly appeared. He didn't go into the house. He stood at the workshop door, arms crossed, looking at me with pitying eyes. "You're still doing this stuff?" he asked, his voice full of contempt. "A waste of time. With your brain, you should be running a company, not building cradles for strangers." That comment touched an old wound. I paused, the plane blade resting on the wood surface. "This work has meaning to me," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's real." "Real?" Mark scoffed. "What is real about poverty and loneliness? Jessica and I just went to see a lake house. The owner is a lawyer. He's your age. He has a yacht, a wine collection. That is life, Dad. You chose wrong. You chose mediocrity. And worse, you're forcing this family to endure that mediocrity with you." I didn't answer. I turned back to my work. The sound of the plane shaving the wood was my only reply. With every stroke, I pushed away a bit of the anger rising in my chest. I knew he was trying to provoke me, trying to make me feel small and like a failure, so I would surrender. My endurance was being tested. Jessica had tactics that were even crueler. She began using the children blatantly. One day she called me. "Arthur," she said, her voice hurried. "Lily is sick. She keeps crying, asking for Grandpa. Can you come?" My heart tightened. I dropped everything, drove nearly an hour into the city. When I arrived at their cold villa, I found Lily, my 6-year-old granddaughter, sitting in the living room watching TV, completely healthy. Jessica walked out, holding a glossy brochure. "Oh, Arthur, you're here. Lily just felt better. But since you're here, take a look at this." She spread brochures for high-end nursing homes on the table. "Look, this place has a golf course. That one has a heated pool. This isn't a prison, Arthur. It's paradise. A paradise you could have if you were just a little practical." I looked at my granddaughter staring blankly at us, then at Jessica's calculating eyes. A chill ran down my spine. They weren't just attacking me. They were poisoning the next generation with lies and greed. I had tried my whole life to shield Mark from the vanity of money, and now he and his wife were dipping their own children into that very poison. "Don't ever use the children to lie to me again," I said, my voice low and hard. For the first time, I let my anger show. Jessica looked surprised, but only for a second. Then she shrugged. "I'm just trying to help you. If you don't want to accept it, that's your problem." The worst confrontation happened on the anniversary of Eleanor's death. I always spent that day alone, visiting her grave, then sitting in silence, looking through old photos. It was a sacred day. They arrived in the afternoon, unannounced. Mark brought a bottle of expensive wine. Jessica held a bouquet of white lilies, the flower Eleanor hated most because it reminded her of funerals. "We came to be with you on this difficult day," Mark said, placing the wine on the table. I knew it was a trap. They were exploiting my grief. "What do you think Mom would want?" Mark started, his voice full of fake sympathy. "She would want to see you happy, safe. She would want to see her descendants have the best life. Selling this land isn't abandoning her memory, it's honoring her by using the legacy of you two to build a better future." My blood ran cold. Using Eleanor's name, using our love to justify their greed. It was an unforgivable insult. "Your mother," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion, "would want her son to be a man of integrity. Someone who knows the difference between value and price. Someone who doesn't sell his soul for a building. Jessica laughed softly. More moral lectures. Arthur, times have changed. Integrity doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't buy a spot in the best schools. You are living in a world that no longer exists. That night, after they left, I sat alone in the dark for a long time. Their words were like invisible splinters, embedding themselves deep in my heart. They didn't just want my land. They wanted to destroy my worldview, to prove that my philosophy of life was a mistake, that love, honor, and simplicity were things for losers. My endurance was not infinite. I felt it being worn down, bit by bit. But deep within the pain, an iron resolve began to form. I would not let them win. I would not let them turn Eleanor's and my legacy into ash. I would endure, and I would wait. Time passed, and my silence seemed to make Mark and Jessica even more impatient. They were like predators losing patience with prey that refused to submit. I could feel the desperation growing in them through phone calls that became shorter and harsher. And I knew, when people are desperate, they do unimaginable things. The deciding blow was struck on a November afternoon when autumn rain blanketed the Oregon sky, turning the outside world a dreary gray. I was sitting by the fireplace, rereading an old book of Eleanor's, when Mark's BMW turned into the yard. This time, he came alone. He walked in, soaked, without his usual polished smile. His expression was a perfect combination of anxiety and exhaustion, an elaborately staged performance. "Dad," he said, his voice hoarse, "I haven't slept for nights." I put the book down, waiting in silence. I knew this wasn't a normal visit. This was the final act of the play. He sat in the chair opposite, hands clasped together. "I talked to a lawyer, not about the land, Dad, about your health." He looked up at me, eyes wide, trying to appear sincere. "You're getting older. I'm scared. I'm truly scared. If something happens, if you have to go to the hospital, I won't be able to make medical decisions for you without legal paperwork. They won't let me in. They won't listen to me. You'll be lying there alone." He pulled a thick stack of papers from his leather briefcase. "Here," he said, pushing it toward me. "It's just procedure, medical power of attorney. It designates a healthcare representative. It allows me to be by your side, to ensure you receive the best care according to your wishes." I looked at the stack of papers. Once an engineer, I had read through thousands of pages of complex legal documents. A part of me, the cold, rational part, was screaming, "Read it, read every word." But another part, the part of a father, was looking at the face of his only son. I taught him his first steps. I healed his wounds when he fell off his bike. I cried tears of pride on his graduation day. Could all of that be just an illusion? "I know you don't trust me," Mark continued, and this time, his voice actually trembled. He had reached the peak of his acting. "After everything with the land, I understand. But please, Dad, trust me just this once. This isn't about money. This is because I love you. I don't want to lose you." He flipped to the last page, where blank lines were waiting. He handed me a pen. "Just sign here, Dad, for my peace of mind." I took the pen. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I looked into Mark's eyes, trying to find a spark, a sign of the son I once knew. I saw nothing but emptiness, a black hole of ambition that had swallowed everything. But perhaps I was deceiving myself. Maybe there was still a shred of hope. Maybe this final act of trust could rekindle something in him. Or perhaps I was simply too tired of this war. The voice of the engineer in me fell silent, drowned out by the sigh of a father. I knew I was walking on a very thin wire. I knew I was betting on a hand I was almost certain to lose. But if there was a 1 in a million chance I was wrong, that my son still had a conscience, I was willing to take that risk. With a slow movement, I signed my name, Arthur Pendleton. My handwriting was steady, but my heart was not. The sound of the nib scratching against the paper echoed in the quiet room, dry and definitive, like the sound of a sentence being passed. Within that stack of papers, cleverly sandwiched between medical documents, was a document titled Durable Power of Attorney. It didn't just allow Mark to make medical decisions. It allowed him to sell my assets, transfer my money, change my will. It gave him the power of a king over my small kingdom. Mark collected the papers, his hands trembling slightly. This time, I didn't think it was acting. It was the tremble of a thief who had just successfully pulled off a major heist. "Thanks, Dad," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "You won't regret this." He left in a hurry, as if afraid I would change my mind. I sat back alone, by the dying fire. I didn't feel relief, I didn't feel reassured, I only felt a cold emptiness. I had just handed my son the key to destroy my life. I had endured, I had tolerated, and now I had signed my own sentence. The game had changed. Now, I was no longer the defender. It was time for the carpenter to start planning his own construction project. 2 weeks passed in unnatural silence. Mark didn't call, Jessica didn't text. The storm seemed to have dissipated, leaving behind a terrifying stillness, like the pause before a giant tree falls. Every morning, when I went to the mailbox, my heart beat a little faster. I knew it was coming, I just didn't know when. And then it arrived, on a clear blue Monday morning. It wasn't a handwritten letter or a bank notice. It was a thick brown envelope with the logo of a law firm I had never heard of. My hand didn't shake as I tore it open. The waiting had tempered my nerves. Inside was a stack of legal documents, but I only needed to read the first line of the cover letter. "Dear Mr. Arthur Pendleton, we are writing to formally notify you that the real estate transaction for the property at address has been completed. Per the agreement, you have 60 days to vacate personal property and surrender the premises to the new owner, Northwood Development Group." I read that sentence again, then again. Cold, emotionless words with no room for explanation or compassion. New owner. Surrender the premises. Those bureaucratic words were trying to wrap up my entire life, Eleanor's entire legacy, into a commercial transaction. I walked into the house, sat in the old armchair where Eleanor used to read. Gus nuzzled his head into my lap, sensing the tension in the silence. I didn't feel shocked. I didn't feel panic. Strangely, I felt a release. The curtain had fallen. The pretense was over. Now only the naked and cruel truth remained. My son had sold his own father's house. In that moment, my mind wasn't in this wooden house anymore. It drifted back to the past, to another world, another life I had buried long ago. I saw myself as a young man, in his 20s, standing in a garage in Palo Alto, California. The air was thick with the smell of solder and burnt coffee. Beside me was David Chen, my best friend, my co-founder. We had nothing but a crazy idea and ironclad faith in it. We named the company Nexus Dynamics. We worked day and night, living on instant noodles and big dreams. That dream became the Prometheus chip, a microprocessor that changed how computers worked. I remembered the feeling when Nexus Dynamics went public. Numbers dancing on screens, turning us into millionaires, then billionaires, overnight. I remembered the lavish parties, the fake praise, the friends who suddenly appeared from nowhere. That world was glittering, seductive, but frighteningly empty. I found myself lost amidst my own success. And then Eleanor appeared. She was a botany teacher, someone who found beauty in things my tech world considered worthless. A wildflower, a wood grain, the silence of a forest. She saved me. She showed me another path. When Mark was born, and not long after, when Eleanor was diagnosed with illness, I made the decision of my life. I would not let my son grow up in a gilded cage devoid of love. I would not let Eleanor's final years be tainted by vanity. I sold all my shares. I went to David, the only person I still trusted, and asked him to set up an anonymous trust, an impenetrable financial fortress. My name appeared nowhere, only a code name known only to me and David. Then, I vanished from Silicon Valley. We moved to Oregon, bought this land, and I built this house with my own hands, a shelter from the world I had abandoned. I became a carpenter, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to teach my son the value of honest labor, of creating something with his own hands. I had failed. I tried to shield him from the temptation of money, but perhaps I shielded him too well, to the point he never learned how to face it. He only saw the lack, the poverty of his father, and he hated it. Greed didn't come from the outside. It sprouted from within him. I folded the letter, placed it on the table. A profound sadness enveloped me, but it wasn't the sadness of failure. It was the sadness of loss. I hadn't lost a house. I had lost a son. But beneath that sadness, the engineer's mind, which had slept for 30 years, began to awaken. A problem had been posed. A system had been compromised, and now it was time to design a solution. I went into the workshop, where the smell of wood and turpentine always calmed me. I didn't call Mark. I didn't call a lawyer. I picked up my old flip phone, finding the single number saved in the contacts under the name DC. The other end picked up after the first ring. "David," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's Art. I think it's time we talked. I have a new project." "Art? Arthur! Good God, is that really you?" David Chen's voice on the other end was the same as ever, sharp and energetic, but there was a warmth in it reserved only for me. 30 years, we only spoke a few times a year, on holidays, but the bond forged in that garage remained unbreakable. "It's me, David," I replied. "Sorry for calling so suddenly." "Don't be silly," he interrupted. "You could call me at 3 a.m. from the moon and I'd still pick up. What's wrong? Your voice, it's different." I took a deep breath, the scent of pine in the workshop filling my lungs. "I need a favor, an investigation. Find out about a high-end real estate project in Astoria, Oregon, named The Summit at Northwood. The lead developer is a broker named Mark Pendleton. I want to know everything about it. Funding sources, partners, legal structure. Specifically, I want to know who the main investors backing it are." There was a silence on the other end. David was too smart not to notice the anomaly. "Mark Pendleton, your son." "That's right," I said with zero emotion in my voice. "All right, Art, consider it done. I'll put my best team on it. Give me 24 hours. I knew David wouldn't ask more. That was the nature of our friendship. Unconditional trust. The next day, I spent the whole day in the workshop, working on a small wooden chair. I needed the focus, needed the precision of the cuts, the patience of sanding. The work kept my mind sharp, not drowned by anger or pain. I was building a chair, but in my head, I was building a strategy. The phone rang exactly 24 hours later. "Art," David said, but this time, the warmth was gone, replaced by a cold fury. "I have the information, and you won't believe it." I sat down on a log, bracing myself. "Say it, David. Your son's project is massive, very ambitious. He's raised significant capital. But the lead investor, the one who poured in over 60% of the total capital." He paused, as if not wanting to say it. "Who is it?" I asked. "It's us, Art. It's our fund." I closed my eyes. The air in the workshop seemed to thicken. How is that possible? Through a chain of subsidiaries and venture capital funds we partner with. My team traced the money flow back. It went through 3 different shell layers, but ultimately, the main source is the Oakhaven Trust, your code name. The irony was cruel, almost a joke of fate. My son had used the very fortune I had given up to protect him, to steal my home. He had unknowingly pointed a gun at his own secret benefactor. "Does he know?" I asked. "Impossible," David replied immediately. "No one knows about Oakhaven except me, you, and 2 senior lawyers. To him, this is just a New York investment fund looking for opportunities on the West Coast. This kid, he just bit the hand that isn't just feeding him, but owns the whole restaurant." "What should I do, Art?" David asked, his voice full of indignation. "Just say the word. I'll pull the funding immediately. I'll ruin him. I'll ensure he can never work in real estate again." I sat thinking. That was the easy path, a quick and sweet revenge. But that wasn't my way. Loud destruction doesn't bring justice, it only brings more rubble. I needed something else. I needed the truth. "No, David," I said, my voice decisive. "Don't do anything. Keep the investment. Let everything proceed as planned." "What are you saying?" David almost shouted. "You're going to let him take your house?" "The house is just a wooden structure, David. What he is trying to take is bigger than that. He is trying to take his own soul. I won't let him do that in the dark." I paused, looking out the workshop window where the last rays of sunlight were slanting through the trees. "I just received something. An invitation." "What invitation?" "Mark and Jessica are throwing a big party to celebrate the deal. They invited all the investors and VIPs in town. They also invited me." David fell silent, and I knew his strategic mind was starting to work, putting the pieces together. "Are you planning to?" he started. "I think it's time I went out and socialized a bit," I interrupted. "And David, I want you to come with me, as the guest of honor. CEO of Vantis Capital, the lead investor." A deep, knowing laugh resonated from the other end. "Arthur Pendleton, you old fox. I'm booking a flight right now. Tell me, what is the dress code for this party?" I looked down at my faded blue work clothes, my shoes covered in sawdust. "I think," I said with a slight smile, "the first in weeks. I already have my outfit." The chess piece was placed. The board was set. The game was no longer defense. Now it was time to attack. Not with the power of money, but with the power of truth. The days waiting for the party were strange. On one hand, I felt a cold calm, the focus of a craftsman before a major project. On the other, memories of the past surged back powerfully, as if my mind was reviewing the entire journey that brought me to this moment. I couldn't stop thinking about Silicon Valley. Not about the smoke-filled meeting rooms or long nights writing code, but about the feeling of absolute emptiness right at the peak of fame. I remembered a specific party, organized to celebrate Nexus Dynamics reaching a $10 billion valuation. It was held at a hilltop villa, with an infinity pool overlooking the entire San Francisco Bay. Everyone was there: investors, rival CEOs, tech journalists. I stood on the balcony, champagne in hand, looking down at the sea of glittering lights below. People came to congratulate me, pat my back, talk about how we changed the world. But I felt nothing. I felt like an actor playing a role that wasn't his. The conversations revolved only around money, the next IPO, the new funding round, who bought which private jet. No one talked about creating something beautiful or helping others. They only talked about winning. That was the night I realized that in this world, you don't own success. Success owns you. It demands your time, energy, and eventually, your soul. I left the party early, telling no one. When I got home, Eleanor was asleep, and baby Mark, just 4 years old then, was lying in his crib. I stood there, looking at my son, his face peaceful in sleep. And I wondered, what kind of world am I building for him? A world where a person's value is measured by their stock price. A world where success means defeating others. That very moment planted the seed for my departure. I contrasted that memory with another, one I cherished more than anything. It was a Saturday afternoon, a few years after we moved to Oregon. Mark, about 10 years old then, and I were in the workshop. I was teaching him how to make a small wooden box. "Slow down, son," I said, as he struggled with the handsaw. "Feel the grain, don't fight it, work with it." I showed him how to sand the edges until they were smooth, how to join the corners with dovetail joints, a technique requiring precision and patience. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and sawdust clung to his hair. Finally, when the box was finished, he held it up, his eyes shining with pure pride. "I did it, Dad," he cheered. "I made it with my own hands." That was a joy no financial report could bring. The joy of creation. The joy of turning an idea into a tangible object. In that moment, I thought I had succeeded. I thought I had taught him the most important lesson, that true value doesn't lie in owning, but in creating. But where did that child go? The boy with the shining eyes and sawdust-covered hands had vanished, replaced by a man with empty eyes and hands that only knew how to sign contracts. As I sat in the workshop, amidst the tools and scraps of wood, I realized that the coming confrontation wasn't just about a house or a piece of land. It was a battle for the soul of that memory. It was a final effort to prove to myself that my philosophy of life wasn't a mistake. I didn't hate Mark. Even after everything he did, I couldn't hate him. I only felt a deep sadness. I grieved for the child who lost his way. I grieved for the man he should have become. Deep down, I knew that party wouldn't bring my son back. The crack was too large, the rot had gone too deep. But I had to do this, not to exact revenge on him, but to protect my legacy. My legacy wasn't the multi-billion-dollar trust fund David managed. My legacy was the belief in integrity, the belief that building a small wooden box with love is worth more than building an empire with greed. And that legacy I would defend with everything I had. On the night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the porch, sat on the swing I made for Eleanor. The night wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Gus lay at my feet, resting his head on my shoes. I looked up at the starry sky and whispered to Eleanor, "I'm sorry, my love. I tried. I really tried. But perhaps I failed. But I promise you, I won't let them turn our home into a symbol of their greed. I won't let that happen." A strange peace washed over me. I was ready. The day of the party arrived, bringing a sky so unusually blue, as if nature was trying to hide the tension simmering beneath. I woke up early as usual, fed Gus, brewed a pot of coffee. I didn't feel nervous. Instead, I felt a heightened focus, the stillness of a soldier before the decisive battle. I spent the whole morning in the workshop, not to work, but just to be there. I touched the familiar tools, breathed in the scent of wood. This was my sanctuary, where I found balance. I needed to carry that balance into the chaotic world I was about to enter. In the afternoon, David called me from his hotel. "I've arrived, Art. Ready?" "I was born ready, old friend," I replied. "What will you wear?" he asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. "What I wear every day," I said. "I am a carpenter, David. I will arrive as a carpenter." As twilight began to fall, dyeing the sky in streaks of orange and purple, I prepared to leave. I put on my faded blue work clothes, the familiar flannel shirt, and wore my sturdy work boots, soles still clinging to a bit of sawdust. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw an old man with wrinkles and gray hair. But in my eyes, there was a fire that hadn't burned for 30 years. I drove my old Ford pickup off the dirt road, heading toward the city. The truck rattled familiarly, like an old friend trying to reassure me. As I drove through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods with massive houses and perfectly manicured lawns, I felt like someone from another world. The villa Mark and Jessica rented for the party sat on a hill, overlooking the entire city. Bright lights spilled from every window, and thumping music echoed in the night air. A long line of luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, Porsches, were parked along the driveway. I drove my pickup past them, feeling the eyes of the valets. I found an empty spot at the end of the line, next to a sleek black Bentley, and parked. The sound of my old engine died, leaving a contrasting silence. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the truck. As I walked toward the house, I could see the guests through the large glass windows. Men in expensive suits, women in glittering evening gowns. They laughed, clinked glasses, painting a perfect picture of success and wealth. When I reached the door, Mark and Jessica were standing there greeting guests. They looked like a royal couple. Mark in a Tom Ford suit, Jessica in a tight red dress, diamonds sparkling on her neck and wrist. When Jessica saw me, the smile on her lips froze. Her face transformed from jubilant to horrified in a split second. She nudged Mark's arm. Mark turned around. When he saw me, in my work clothes, his eyes narrowed in anger. He rushed over, trying to intercept me before I got inside. "What the hell are you doing here looking like that?" he hissed, his voice low but full of venom. "I told you to behave properly. Are you deliberately trying to humiliate me?" I looked him straight in the eye. "You invited me, Mark. I came. This is who I am. If you are ashamed of that, that is your problem, not mine." "Go home," Jessica whispered from behind, voice full of panic. "Please, Arthur, don't ruin this evening." "Oh, I don't intend to ruin it," I said, voice calm. "I just came to congratulate my son and meet his investors." Right at that moment, a black Lincoln pulled up right behind me. The door opened and David Chen stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, exuding an aura of power and confidence that no one else at this party could match. Mark and Jessica were stunned. They knew who David was from photos in business magazines. CEO of Vantis Capital, their biggest investor, their savior. "Mr. Chen," Mark stammered, hurriedly pushing me aside to greet the VIP guest. "What an honor! We didn't think you would come." David smiled, a polite but cold smile. He ignored Mark's outstretched hand. Instead, he stepped to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder familiarly. "I couldn't miss such an important occasion," David said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, "especially when my best friend and longtime business partner is here." Mark and Jessica looked at David, then at me, then back at David. Confusion and bewilderment were evident on their faces. They couldn't comprehend it. The poor carpenter and the New York tycoon. "Let's go inside, Art," David said to me. "I think we have a few things to clarify." We walked together into the lion's den. The whole room seemed to fall silent as we passed. All eyes were fixed on the odd pair, the carpenter in work clothes and the tycoon in an Armani suit. The game had truly begun. As David and I walked into the center of the party, an awkward silence blanketed the room. The music seemed to dim, conversations ceased. Everyone looked at us, a couple that couldn't be more opposite, trying to decode the situation. Mark and Jessica rushed behind, faces pale, smiles forced. Mark tried to regain control. He stepped up, clapping his hands to attract attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to welcome a special guest tonight. Let me introduce Mr. David Chen, CEO of Vantis Capital, the lead investor of the Summit Project." Polite applause rang out. Everyone knew Vantis Capital. It was a name synonymous with power and money. David nodded slightly, but his gaze didn't meet Mark's. His eyes scanned the crowd, cold and analytical. "Thank you, Mark," David said, his voice echoing through the room. "I am very pleased to be here. But before we talk about the project, I think there is a more important person we should all welcome." Then he did something no one expected. In front of all the investors, the lawyers, the influential figures, David Chen, one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, turned to me, a carpenter in work clothes, and bowed respectfully. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, voice full of respect, "it is an honor to be here with you tonight." If a bomb had exploded in the room, it couldn't have caused greater shock. The entire room went dead silent. Mark and Jessica looked as if they had been struck by lightning. Mark's jaw dropped, and Jessica clung to her husband's arm as if she were about to collapse. I stepped forward, standing next to David. I looked straight at Mark, then out at the crowd. My voice wasn't loud, but in the absolute silence, every word was clear. "Good evening," I began. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am a carpenter, and I am Mark's father." I paused, letting that information sink in. "I am here tonight to congratulate my son. He is a very ambitious man, someone willing to do anything to get what he wants." I looked straight into Mark's eyes, which were now filled with panic. So ambitious that to secure the collateral for this project, he sold the house his father was living in, a house he tricked his own father into signing over. A murmur of astonishment spread through the room. People turned to look at Mark and Jessica, eyes no longer full of admiration, but suspicion and disdain. That is a misunderstanding, Mark stammered, trying to object. My father, he's old. He's not lucid anymore. David Chen took a step forward, and his presence immediately extinguished Mark's lie. I can assure you, David said, voice cold as steel, that Mr. Arthur Pendleton's intellect is sharper than anyone in this room, including mine. He turned to the crowd. I am David Chen. Yes, I am the CEO of Vantis Capital, the lead investor for the Summit Project. But there is one thing Mark and Jessica didn't tell you. The reason Vantis Capital invested in a project in a small town in Oregon is for one single reason. He paused, creating breathless drama. It is because our biggest client, founding shareholder, and the silent mentor of our fund for the past 30 years, is his father, Mr. Arthur Pendleton. The silence shattered, replaced by gasps of shock. The truth was too shocking, too unbelievable. The poor carpenter was essentially an anonymous billionaire. His son had scammed his own sponsor. David turned to Mark, his eyes holding no emotion other than judgment. Defrauding your own father, the man who silently funded your entire career, to seize his home, is an act that is not only hideously unethical, but also a serious breach of contract. It shows a lack of judgment and character instability, unacceptable in a business partner. He spoke decisively. Effective this moment, Vantis Capital officially withdraws all investment capital from the Summit Project. This deal is dead. The party is over. Chaos erupted. Phones were pulled out. Other investors started shouting, demanding answers. The guests, people who just minutes ago were toasting Mark and Jessica, now began to leave, avoiding them like the plague. In an instant, the paper empire Mark and Jessica had labored to build crumbled to ash. Mark stood frozen, his face as white as a sheet. Jessica finally couldn't take it. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't feel gloating. I didn't feel victorious. Looking at the two shattered children in front of me, I only felt a deep sadness. I had won the battle, but I had lost the greater war a long time ago. David put a hand on my shoulder. Let's go, Art. There's nothing left for us here. We turned our backs on the ruin and walked out the door, leaving behind the screaming, the crying, and the shattering of dreams built on a foundation of lies. The business world has a very good memory, especially for scandals. News of what happened at the party spread like wildfire. Broker scam's billionaire father became headlines on local financial news. For Mark and Jessica, it wasn't just the collapse of a project, it was total destruction. With legal support from David's team, reversing the illegal sale was quick and easy. The power of attorney was declared void as it was obtained through deceit. The house and land returned to me. Legally, everything was back to normal. But emotionally, nothing could ever be the same. Business partners turned their backs on Mark. Banks called in loans. His reputation in real estate was ruined irreparably. Jessica, who once craved joining the elite, was now shunned and mocked by that very community. They lost everything: money, status, and the fake relationships they once cherished. About a few weeks later, on a pouring afternoon, their BMW appeared in front of my yard again. It didn't look sleek anymore, but covered in mud, just like its owners. They stood at my door, soaked and shivering. Mark wasn't wearing a suit. He wore an old sweater. Jessica wasn't wearing makeup, her hair matted to her face, eyes puffy from crying. They looked pathetic. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. I just stood there, blocking the way. "Dad," Mark began, his voice cracking, "we came to apologize." He knelt right on the wet porch, a dramatic gesture, but I felt nothing. "We were wrong, Dad, horribly wrong. We were blinded by money. We didn't know who you were." That was the crux of it. We didn't know who you were. They didn't apologize for hurting their father. They apologized for not realizing their father was a gold mine. Their confession didn't stem from remorse, but from regret. Regret for the massive fortune they had thrown away with their own hands. Jessica sobbed too. "Please forgive us, Arthur. We'll do anything. Please, give us another chance." I looked at them. Two broken people in front of me. I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had dissipated, leaving only an immense sadness, the sadness of a father who has seen the worst part of his children. "Stand up, Mark," I said, my voice not harsh, just deeply weary. "Don't demean yourself any further." He hesitantly stood up. "Forgiveness," I said slowly, "is not something to be traded. It must come from true repentance. But I don't see that in your eyes. I only see fear and greed transformed into desperation." I looked straight into Mark's eyes. "You aren't crying because you betrayed your father. You are crying for the zeros in the bank account you will never have. Money was never the problem for me, but it seems to be everything to you. And after all this, you still don't understand that." I took a step back, hand on the doorknob. "I won't destroy you further. I won't sue you, but I can't help you either. You chose your path. Now walk it on your own." "Dad," Mark called desperately. "This door," I said, voice firm and final, "for both of you, is closed forever." I gently closed the door, the latch clicking like a final period. I didn't look back. I leaned against the door, listening to their car leave in the rain. I didn't feel relief. I just felt empty. A part of my life had ended. But when one door closes, another opens. I no longer wanted to stay in that house. Memories of Eleanor were still there, but they had been tainted by betrayal. I decided to sell the land, but this time on my own terms. All the proceeds from the land sale, along with a significant portion of the trust, I used to establish a foundation. I named it the Pendleton Legacy Foundation. It isn't an investment fund. It is a scholarship fund. A fund dedicated to underprivileged youth, those with passion but no means, to study traditional crafts. Carpenters, blacksmiths, potters, weavers, trades slowly being forgotten in the digital world. I wanted my legacy not to lie in skyscrapers, but in the skilled hands of the next generation. I bought a smaller piece of land, further away, and built a new house, a new workshop with my own hands. The work of rebuilding wasn't just about a house, but about myself. Every hammer blow, every saw cut, helped heal my wounds. I found joy again, not in the silence of hiding, but in the noise of creating and giving. Now, as I sit here, in my new workshop, looking out at a lush green valley, I often reflect on everything that happened. The smell of fresh pine and linseed oil fills the air, a scent of new beginnings. Gus, now much older, is sunbathing by the door. Peace has returned, but this is a different peace. It isn't the peace of running away, but the peace of acceptance and facing reality. My story isn't a fairy tale. No miracle happened. I didn't get my son back. The wound of betrayal will never fully heal. It will become a part of me, like a scar on wood, a reminder of the fragility of trust. But I learned an important thing. For years, I thought two people existed inside me, the Silicon Valley engineer and the Oregon carpenter. I tried to bury one to become the other, but I was wrong. They aren't different people. They are two sides of the same coin. The engineer understands systems, logic, how to build complex structures. The carpenter understands materials, patience, the beauty of things made by hand. It was the combination of both that helped me weather the storm. The carpenter in me gave me the strength to endure, to observe in silence. But the engineer gave me the ability to analyze the situation, formulate a plan, and execute it precisely when the time came. I didn't abandon my old self. I simply found a better way to use his skills. The real legacy I want to leave behind isn't the Pendleton Foundation or the money in it. The legacy is a lesson I paid a very high price to learn. That a person's value doesn't lie in what they own on paper, but in what they build with their character. A house, no matter how big, can collapse if its foundation is lies. A family, no matter how perfect it looks, will shatter if not built on a foundation of respect and trust. I tried to teach Mark the value of creating tangible things, but I forgot to teach him the more important lesson. That the most solid thing we can build in this life isn't made of wood or stone, but made of integrity. And that is a foundation that greed can never buy, and betrayal can never break. I don't know how Mark and Jessica are doing now. I chose not to find out. I hope in their collapse, they find a chance to rebuild, not a financial empire, but their own selves. But that is their journey, not mine anymore. My journey is here now, in this workshop, with the young people my foundation is helping. I see in their eyes the fire of creativity, the pure pride when they finish a piece. I see in them the image of the son I lost, and that is both painful and brings a strange comfort. I can't change the past, but I can invest in the future. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't an easy story to tell, and I know it wasn't an easy story to hear. But I believe that within the grain of truth, even if it is sometimes rough and full of cracks, we can find strength and wisdom. Each of our lives is like a structure under construction. Sometimes we focus too much on its scale, on the magnificent exterior, and forget the most important thing, the quality of the foundation. Please never trade your integrity for anything, because when the storm comes, and it certainly will, that is the only thing that will keep you standing. If this story touched you, or if you have your own story about rebuilding after a collapse, I would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your sharing is a way for us to build a stronger community together. And if you feel this channel provides value, please support us. Your support will help us continue to tell stories that need to be heard. Thank you, and may you always find peace in your own construction.